Nurses are sworn to protect, nurture, and tend with loving care, are some of the most non recognized heroes we have among us. Their compassion and dedication are the bedrock of our healthcare system, providing solace and healing during our most vulnerable moments. But what happens when those very heroes turn against us, using their knowledge and access to medications as tools of destruction? In the case of Elizabeth Wettlaufer, the stark reality of this betrayal sent shockwaves through both the medical community and the society at large. Her actions revealed the chilling potential of compassion, forcing us to confront the unnerving question: how can those we trust to mend our wounds become the authors of our pain? I'm Stephanie Warham, and this is Wicked Ever After. Please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and liking this episode. I really appreciate all the support. Just a reminder that I have Invisalign, and if I pronounce a word or two, I apologize in advance. Elizabeth Wettlaufer is Canada's first known healthcare serial killer. Just a few years ago, in June 2017, Elizabeth was convicted of 8 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of aggravated assault. Over the course of her time as an RN, 14 victims fell prey to what she called red surges. So how did the little girl that grew up in a small farming community end up sending multiple patients to their death? On June 10th, 1967, Elizabeth Tracy May Parker was born to parents Doug and Hazel Parker. The family resided on the outskirts of Woodstock, Ontario, called South Zora Township. It's a tight-knit community, and to this day, Elizabeth is still known to those that reside there as simply Beth Parker. A former neighbor and friend, Glenn Hart, lived across the street from Beth's home. He told reporters that he would describe the household in the following way, open quote, "If you think the 1950s Leave It to Beaver sort of image in your head, that's the kind of image that would be portrayed," end quote. Beth's father, Doug, was an elder in the local church, and the Parkers held deep Christian fundamentalist beliefs. The family was expected to follow the strict practices of the church, and behind closed doors, it appeared that Beth's parents were very controlling. When Beth was a teenager, Glenn came out as being gay, much to the disapproval of Doug and the other elders in the church. Due to his sexuality, he was asked to leave the church. Nothing less than a true upholding of fundamentalist beliefs would be accepted. You can imagine the pressure this put on Beth, always having to walk the line of perfection, never astray outside of it, and make sure to be surrounded by people her church and parents would approve of. Growing up, Beth was shy and awkward, leading her to become a frequent target of verbal abuse from other kids her age. The bullying was relentless. She was often called Bethy Porker when kids made fun of her weight. And on many occasions, she would hear, open quote, "Here comes little Bethy Parker," end quote. She grew to resent and hate being called Bethy, so much that she eventually changed her name to Beth with an E on the end. This allowed her to feel a sense of control over her own name and also special, since Beth with an E on the end is very uncommon. It seemed like Beth was trying to be noticed. Her mom was submissive and compliant to her dad, and women in that faith were not given voices or really valued for their full potential, leading Beth to feel invisible except to her bullies. Once Beth entered high school, things calmed down. She found a love of field hockey, and she was the goalie on the school team, as well as participated in the school band. She found her groove, and she also found some people that accepted her. However, there were times when she exposed a rather devious and vindictive side. One of those times was when she was scheming to get a fellow classmate in trouble. It's unclear if that boy had been bullying her or if she just didn't like him. But one day in school, she pulled a fire alarm, hoping to pin it on him and watch him suffer the consequences. Some of these acts might seem like harmless teenage pranks, but over time, they paint a picture of a girl who was willing to do anything to go after those people that she didn't like or that didn't like her. When not planning devious acts and pulling fire alarms, Beth was struggling with her own sexuality and felt constantly conflicted about how she was feeling. One day, she wanted to repent her perceived sins, and the next day, she spent hours trying to validate her true feelings. Remember, she's growing up in a very strict religious home, has already seen her friend kicked out of the church, and now she's having those same sexual feelings that she has been told her whole life are wrong. This must have been a super confusing time for her. After leaving high school and the teenage drama behind, Beth originally planned on studying journalism, but later decided to pursue a degree in counseling at London Baptist Bible College in London, Ontario. During this time, Beth's father decided to take classes at the same college so he could keep an eye on her. I'm assuming he wanted to make sure she wasn't being influenced by the modern world. I also think it's really, really weird that he did that, in my opinion. Shortly after her first year was up, Beth was spotted by someone with a girlfriend at a gay friendly church. News quickly spread, and she was forced to leave college for a brief period of time by her family. They were embarrassed and mortified by her actions and made her undergo conversion therapy to essentially ungay her. After this incident and her parents' attempt at praying the gay away, Beth eventually returned to college and after graduation decided that being a counselor wasn't for her. She decided to pursue a 3-year nursing program in Stratford, Ontario. She graduated that program and in 1995 became a licensed nurse. Beth's troubles seemed to follow her in her career as well. She had a hard time keeping a job and was often going from job placement to job placement. Her nursing license was restricted after she stole painkillers from her work. Despite struggling with her sexuality, in 1997, she married Donnie Wetlaufer, a local truck driver she met at a Baptist church. Confused, unhappy, and mentally struggling, Beth appeared to be on a downward spiral. She was actively being treated for borderline personality disorder. Her struggles with drug addiction continued, and she also continued to steal pain meds, which were the same pain meds that she had stolen when her license was restricted. And she did overdose on the meds at one point and survived. After her overdose, she was unable to work full time, so she picked up odd shifts as a personal support worker in various care homes. Beth continued to be conflicted over her sexuality, which led her to begin reaching out to women online. This went on for many years. But in 2007, her husband Donnie discovered one of her online relationships had developed into something a little bit more than a friendship. It's unknown if he knew of her relationships before this and thought they were just friends, but whatever the case and whatever he learned, it seemed to suggest she was having a deep romantic relationship with a particular woman online. Appalled, confused, and angry at the betrayal, Donnie left Beth that same year. Seemingly free to finally explore her sexuality, Beth wasn't too heartbroken about her dissolving marriage, and her new romance flourished. Eventually, she and her online lover moved into an apartment together and soon became engaged. This is when she began working full time at Crescent Care and when her so called red surges began. At this point, Beth had 12 years of nursing experience under her belt, and she had spent much of that time diagnosing blood sugar problems and injecting insulin. So this wasn't new to her. The thing is, back then, long-term care facilities like Crescent Care didn't keep too close an eye on their insulin supply. And they also didn't have the technology in place like today to keep track. It was very much the honor system. The process of insulin injections was and continues to be pretty straightforward. You simply inject the insulin cartridge into the insulin pen and then administer it. Now, the process is even simpler, but the point is, it doesn't require massive amounts of training to inject the medication. An insulin pen has a needle on one end and a dial on the other, allowing complete control of how much insulin is given to a patient. So for reasons unknown, Beth became extremely interested in learning how much insulin could kill a person. And with a quick amount of research, she soon found out the lethal dose amounts. Beth would simply dial up the dose at the end of the insulin pen, which would release massive amounts of insulin into a discrete spot on her victim's body. Eventually, and in a rather short time, the insulin would send the patient into hypoglycemic shock, causing a complete blood sugar level crash, resulting in death. Within days of starting her new job, Beth administered a massive dose of insulin to her very first victim, Clotilde Adriano, an 88-year-old woman who suffered from dementia. She ended up surviving only because other staff members noticed she was quickly failing and were able to restore her blood sugar levels before it was too late. In a confession to police years later, Beth said that she didn't really want her to die. Open quote, "I don't know, I was angry and had this sense inside me that she might be a person God wanted back with him. I honestly felt that God wanted to use me." End quote. It was also later discovered that Beth was doing the same thing to another patient, Albina Dematriosis, but she also survived the nearly fatal dose of insulin. A short 3 months into her time at Crescent Care, Beth was successful in actually killing one of her patients, an 84-year-old Second World War veteran, James Silcock. James had lost his mobility due to a recent stroke, and at the beginning of Beth's shift on August 11th, 2007, James was agitated, unsure of his whereabouts, and spent a lot of time calling out for his wife. Later, Beth said what she often referred to as red surge was boiling inside of her. She had a hard time describing the feeling she called red surge, but would often say it was a feeling of so much anger, like she was seeing red. Eventually, she started to believe the devil would overtake her in these moments, causing her to want to kill and hurt anyone in front of her. These red surges would often be followed by hard periods of guilt, but would always come back, forcing her to find another victim. In James' case, she felt a red surge of anger and said that she, open quote, wanted him to die, end quote. Later that night at 9:30, after caring for James all day, Beth loaded the insulin pen and sent 50 units of quick-acting insulin into his body, which was twice the amount she had used for her 2 previous victims. Right before James went under, he reportedly called out, open quote, "I'm sorry, I love you," end quote. Unclear who he was talking to caused Beth feelings of pain and shame about what she had done, but she also said that when it was over, she felt, open quote, like a pressure had been relieved from me, end quote. But the relief didn't seem to last long. Shortly after killing James, and only 3 days before Christmas in 2007, Beth killed again, this time Maurice Granite. Years later, after Beth was arrested, court documents revealed that Beth was tormented but unable to distinguish right from wrong. Psychological testing revealed that Beth exhibited, open quote, significant symptoms of borderline personality disorder, including mood instability, impulsivity, fear of abandonment, unstable relationships, and anger, end quote. Her mental illness and reliance on meds were documented in numerous medical records, but she was able to function with them for many years, allowing her to fly under the radar. One medical report stated, open quote, much of this behavior seemed to have worsened since her husband left, but this behavior was present prior to her marriage as well. In fact, after the age of 15, Beth developed what doctors diagnosed as antisocial personality disorder, and psychiatrists eventually determined that Beth had difficulties with being brought up in a controlled Baptist home environment. While she regularly attended church and committed to fundamentalist beliefs, she often lived conflicted and confused, end quote. No kidding, I would also be very confused as well. After killing 2 victims in 2008, Beth's relationship with her fiance came to an end, and she was back to finding love online. Eventually, she connected with Sheila Andrews, a prison cafeteria worker in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Their relationship built and grew online, and in the summer of 2008, Sheila invited Beth to her hometown for a week-long visit. Sheila later reported that Beth ran off of the plane in a summer dress and bright red lipstick and was instantly overwhelmed by all of Beth's affection. Sheila said she had come charging at her with hugs and kisses. Beth told people at work how much she loved Sheila, how they would get together, and all the details of their relationship. Sheila was a little unsettled after all the love bombing and was overwhelmed and would often say, open quote, okay, like slow down there, let's get to know each other, end quote. The first night Beth was in town, they stayed in a motel near the airport. And when Sheila woke up the next day, she had a sinking feeling the relationship wasn't going to work. Over the next few days, as they spent more time together, Sheila couldn't shake the feeling that there was a more troubling side to Beth. Open quote, she pouted a lot and had little temper tantrums, like if she didn't get something her own way, like my affection and stuff like that. There were a lot of childish issues with her, and I just thought, you're a grown woman, act like it, end quote. Sheila went on to say, open quote, she seemed to be quite proud of being a nurse. I think she liked the fact that she was in charge in the evenings. She enjoyed the power. I think she enjoyed that the most, end quote. Feeling more and more concerned, Sheila decided to break it off with Beth at the end of their week-long trip together. And Beth went home blindsided, rejected, and bitter. Alone again, Beth threw herself back into work and in her free time began writing graphic poems. She would often post these online on a website called allpoetry.com under the pen name Betty Weston. Some poems seemed normal, but others appeared much, much darker. Here is an example. Where am I left then? What would they say? Yes, what will they say when the real truth is known? When it is found out what I do alone? It seemed like Beth often thought about her actions and teetered between anger, relief, and guilt over what she had done. By the time 2011 came to a close, Crescent Care had lost 3 more residents unexpectedly. Gladys Millard, Helen Matheson, and Mary Zurowinski had all died under the hand of Beth, but nothing suspicious was reported and no autopsies were done. Ironically, Beth was in charge of reporting suspicious deaths that may have happened on her watch. However, she reported nothing out of the ordinary when these deaths occurred, and no one ever questioned it. Despite having complete control of what to report surrounding these victims, Beth still carried a sense of paranoia and fear about being caught or losing even more control the next time. Beth's medication addiction was getting worse, and while she claimed she was never high at work, a coworker did find her passed out one night in the basement of Crescent Care during one of her shifts. Beth later admitted that she would binge on the pain meds several times a month, and the pain meds were always available at work. And while there was a closer eye on the stock of the pain meds than there was insulin, Beth easily navigated her way around that by stealing from her own patients. She later told police that, open quote, some of the patients had confusion, so they couldn't tell the difference between what pills you were giving them. I could give them a laxative instead of their pain meds, end quote. Besides switching out the pills, Beth would sometimes open the capsules, swallow the contents, and then give the patient the empty pill case. Other times, she would just take the remaining pain meds from deceased patients, and when the new drug supplies arrived, if they weren't put in the safe right away, she would just snatch them up and take them home. It would often take weeks or months before anyone could notice that the meds were missing. And when the police got involved, Beth would fake ignorance. To go to these lengths seemed the sign of a true addict, and Beth did later confess that she was no longer controlling the drug, rather, it was controlling her. Her addiction to the pain meds seemed to stem from the fact that the drug made her more relaxed at work, helping alleviate the pressure she always felt to be the best person. She stated that after 2 or 3 pills, that pressure was gone. For a while, it seemed like the drug addiction was actually working to keep the red surge and pressure at bay, because for 2 whole years, Beth didn't kill anyone. She simply lived her life, went to work, and continued to take her meds. But by 2013, the red surges seemed to be back, and her next victim was in the crosshairs. Helen Young was a 90-year-old patient, and according to Beth, open quote, was very difficult to deal with, end quote. She suffered from dementia and was repeatedly crying for help, annoying Beth whenever she was on duty. Appearing to be unable to tolerate the annoyance any longer, Beth injected Helen with all the insulin pens she could possibly hold. Her face went red, her eyes bulged, and her limbs bent inward due to the increased insulin causing a seizure. By the next morning, Helen was dead. Beth later told police that some of her victims would stroke out, causing their bodies to contort and foam from their mouths. Vital organs would eventually shut down, and death would be relatively quick, just a few hours. She said, however, that in some cases, her victims would slip into a vegetative state for days before finally dying from an overdose. After Helen's death, she spent time consoling Helen's distraught niece, hugging her, wiping her tears, and soothing her with comforting words. That's fucked up. This appeared to be how Beth would exert her control over the victims and their families. When she described this incident, Helen's death, she said she felt the surging and laughter afterwards, which she said was like a crackling from the pit of hell. Guilt continued to follow the red surges, and it seemed to hit a boiling point shortly after Helen's death. During that time, Beth was attending a multi-dimensional family church in Woodstock, Ontario, and in the summer, she drove to her pastor's house to confess her secrets to him and her wife. The pastor and his wife prayed over her and told Beth, open quote, "This was God's grace, but if you ever do it again, we will have to turn you into the police," end quote. He was later questioned by police, but claimed that he didn't really know if he believed Beth or not, and his name was never released to the public. It appears that the praying over her method didn't really work, because by early 2014, 7 patients had died and 4 others had survived unexplained hypoglycemic episode under Beth's watch. She was suspended 4 times for making non-insulin related medication errors that ended up harming patients. And in March of that year, Crescent Care decided she wasn't worth the risk and fired her. They also took it one step further and reported her numerous mistakes to Ontario's College of Nurses, the professional organization that oversees nursing practices and conduct. But nothing came out of it, as the college took no known action to sanction Beth or bring her in for questioning. Beth was out of work for several weeks before she was called in for an interview at Meadow Park Long Term Care in London, Ontario. When she was asked about her previous termination, she told them that it was due to medical errors, and the person that was interviewing her said they believed in second chances and offered her a 1-year contract to work the evening shift, which was her favorite shift. Beth was only at her new job for a month before she took her 8th victim, Arpad Horvath. Everything seemed to be out of control for Beth. The drug use was getting worse, her red surges were becoming more frequent, and she had developed a fondness for hard alcohol. Determining she needed help, she quit her job shortly after the death of Arpad and had her mother drive her to a rehab facility where she stayed for about a month. Apparently, feeling healed, only being out of rehab for about 2 months, Beth began working at Telfer Place, where she was set in charge of caring for the sick and elderly. Soon after, her urges came back, and she attempted to kill Sandra Towler, another patient suffering from dementia. However, other staff at the facility found her in bed suffering and saved her life. In 2016, it seemed the need to discuss her urges and her illness came to a head, and Beth reached out to her former flame, Sheila. She wrote her a Facebook message saying, open quote, "I'm restless tonight, hyper about my job, having a hard time getting one of the required skills right. The skill is changing the dressing on an IV line that goes directly to the heart. I violated the sterile field and put things in the wrong place today," end quote. She was referring to Bev Bertram, a 68-year-old woman Beth had given a lethal dose of insulin to. It's unconfirmed if this was her way of confessing or if the IV story was actually true. It didn't seem like anything would stop Beth from leaving a path of destruction everywhere she went without consequences. But a true test came when she was offered a job at a school program. Her job would be helping to treat children with diabetes. From the outside, it seemed like the perfect fit to hire the nurse whose main job in her career had been giving insulin. But even the darkest parts of Beth knew she could never kill a child, and she ended up passing on the job, thankfully. Appearing to lose trust in herself to not kill and live in fear of being caught, Beth decided to leave the nursing profession in August 2016. Now unemployed, Beth was about to hit rock bottom. One of her apartment neighbors, Wade Messenger, reported that one day he received a knock from Beth at his door. Open quote. She looked very stressed out, shaky. Her face didn't look the same. She looked like she was sick, end quote. Wade didn't really like Beth much and had always had a bad feeling about her. He went so far as to suspect Beth had previously vandalized his bicycle, his son's stroller, and his door lock, leading the two to have several feuds over the years. But he decided to take pity on her and let her in. Beth said, open quote, "I don't have any pills. I'm suffering from morphine withdrawals," end quote. Beth asked for anything to ease the withdrawal symptoms and had seen Wade occasionally smoke marijuana, so asked if he could give her some. He ended up giving her a joint, but told her it was a one-time deal and never to come back again. She agreed and never came back. Shortly after, Beth asked a good friend to take her beloved Jack Russell Terrier for a few days, and Wade saw her leave the apartment complex, suitcase in hand, appearing defeated with her head hung low. Beth drove to the train station and within 2 hours checked herself into the emergency ward at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. Once admitted, Beth was determined to get the weight of secrets off her chest and be taken seriously. Up until this point, no one had really believed her, and it seemed like she was determined to make that change. Over the next 20 days, Beth confessed repeatedly to anyone and everyone that would lend a listening ear. Unlike in the past, she was finally taken seriously, and one of the largest police probes in Ontario history was put into action. Her psychologist, Dr. Alan Kahn, suggested that she organize all her thoughts on paper, but did warn her that anything she revealed would be turned over to the police. Seemingly almost relieved, Beth gave Dr. Kahn a 4-page written confession outlining when the murders took place and who she had killed. She could not recall every last name, but the details provided were clear and matter of fact, as if they were just like the day-to-day tasks of living. Throughout the confession, there didn't appear to be any remorse or regret. Rather, it appeared the only emotion that was displayed was relief. Finally, unburdened, Beth seemed to reach out to anyone who was willing to hear her confessions. At one point, she even reached out to her friend and old neighbor Glenn Hart on Facebook. She disclosed that she had purposely killed some of her patients in a long message, leaving Glenn unsure of what to make of it. Glenn asked, open quote, "Why did you do this? What brought it on?" End quote. She said, open quote, "Oh, I had some anger issues that I had to deal with, some really major anger issues. I think that I was acting out my anger issues on these people," end quote. Stunned at the confession, Glenn immediately reached out to the police, unaware that they were already involved, and wrote Beth back, open quote, "It'll be hard for you, stay strong, tell the truth," end quote. Beth eventually agreed to go down to the police station to give a recorded statement, and she also asked for her nursing license to be revoked. As investigators poured through death notices and medical records, Beth agreed to a court order preventing her from possessing insulin or going anywhere near long-term care homes. Police took their search to her apartment complex, carting away multiple boxes of evidence, including her computer. Beth's only concern appeared to be what state of disarray her home would be when she returned. Her closest friends had no idea anything out of the ordinary was going on. Beth downplayed everything and never said she was under investigation for murder. They said she was always talking, laughing, and joking like nothing was wrong. 3 days after hanging out with her friends, Beth was arrested and charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of aggravated assault. There was no need for a trial. In June 2017, Beth pled guilty to all charges and was sentenced to life in prison. During her sentencing, Beth spoke to her victims' families, saying, open quote, "I have caused horrendous pain. Sorry is much too small a word. I hope that the families can find some peace and healing," end quote. Beth is serving time in the Vanier Center for Women in Milton, Ontario. She is eligible for parole in 2041, but the judge noted in his judgment that she's unlikely to receive it. To this day, Doug and Hazel Parker have yet to acknowledge the true nature of their daughter's sexuality. When they were asked about Beth's divorce and why Donnie left her, they said, open quote, "He didn't want a sick wife," end quote, referring to her psychological problems. They would also constantly downplay her medication problems, saying they were just medication mix-ups or stress-related episodes. The denial continued after Beth's sentencing, when her mother did everything she could to minimize her daughter's guilt, saying, for example, that Beth, open quote, "didn't have to confess and could have taken her secrets to the grave. What's been lost in all of this is that she tried to do the right thing," end quote. Well, on the outside, it appears that Beth has only spent a few years behind bars. The reality is that she has spent an entire life in prison by her parents' narrative, their lack of acceptance, and delusions of all that Beth was. It leaves you wondering if she would have turned out differently if she had been allowed to explore who she was, be imperfect, and live wholly accepted. Now we'll just never know. Her case did spur massive change across the healthcare system in Ontario. After her sentencing, the Ontario government held a public inquiry into the safety and security of residents in the long-term care home system. The final report of the public inquiry into the safety and security of residents in the long-term care system was released on July 31st, 2019. In the 4-volume report, Justice Eileen Gillies made 91 recommendations. These included greater ministry oversight, increased funding for the training and education of staff, increased staffing levels of registered nurses and registered practical nurses at long-term care homes, less reliance on nurses from temp agencies, and improved shortage and tracking of medication. You will see these numerous changes present everywhere you go now in Ontario. Beth told police that she wasn't sure if she perceived her surges as act of God or the devil. She referred to God a number of times in her confession, but she rationalized her actions by calling herself an angel of mercy. In the press, she was called the angel of death, but the judge at her sentencing said there was nothing angelic about her and instead gave her the name Shadow of Death. We often think the monsters in the shadows come masked and holding guns or knives. They're the most evil among us, and we always assume we can recognize them. But sometimes it's those that we trust the most, that we depend on the most, that we need the most. Beth didn't use a gun or knife, nor did she wear a mask. Instead, she wore scrubs, a smile, and used a syringe as her weapon, promising love and healing to her patients. The hospital corridors that should have echoed with hope and recovery became scenes of unimaginable tragedy. This case really highlights the trials and consequences of addiction, mental health, trust in our healthcare system, and how victims and sufferers of mental health are often failed. While many good changes have been made from this case, families will never get the chance to hold their loved ones' hands or feel the touch of their hands again. Please let me know what you think of this case in the comments. Please hit the subscribe button on YouTube or whatever podcasting platform you're listening on. You can stay connected with me on Instagram and TikTok at This is Stephanie Moram. Until next time, stay safe out there.